Before we descend into the frozen archives of 1983 and the secret corridors of the Soviet Far East, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The stories we uncover here are buried deep in declassified files, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The city of Vladivostok in the early 1980s was not merely a city, it was a fortress disguised as a municipality. Closed to foreigners, wrapped in the eternal fog of the Golden Horn Bay, and serving as the headquarters of the Soviet Pacific Fleet, it was a place where paranoia was not a mental state, but a survival strategy. On the morning of October 14, 1983, a man known to the local port authorities as Lars Jensen was walking along the damp cobblestones of the Svetlanskaya Street. He wore a heavy wool coat, typical of the Scandinavian trade delegates who were occasionally and grudgingly permitted entry to inspect non-military cargo shipments. His real name was Robert Vance. He was 42 years old, a career officer with the Central Intelligence Agency's Soviet Russia Division, and he was currently the most exposed American intelligence asset on the planet. Vance had been operating in the Soviet Union for 3 years, but Vladivostok was a new and dangerous theater. Unlike Moscow, where the surveillance was heavy but predictable, or Leningrad, where there was a semblance of diplomatic cover, Vladivostok was a military zone. Every face on the street belonged to a sailor, a shipbuilder, or an officer of the KGB's Second Chief Directorate. To operate here was to walk into the lion's den wearing a steak dinner. Vance was here for a specific reason, a dead drop scheduled near the funicular railway that overlooked the harbor. The package was rumored to contain the acoustic signatures of the new Delta III class submarines, information that the Pentagon considered critical. At 08:15 a.m., Vance checked his watch. It was a chaotic time in the city. The morning shift was changing at the Dalzavad ship repair yards, filling the streets with gray-clad workers. The fog was thick, rolling off the Sea of Japan, obscuring the grim, brutalist architecture. Vance moved with the casual, confident gait of a bored bureaucrat. He stopped at a kiosk to buy a pack of cigarettes, using the local currency he had carefully aged in his wallet to avoid the crispness of new bills. He didn't know that the operation had been blown 3 days earlier. The KGB had not cracked his cover through a mistake he made. There had been no slip-up in his tradecraft, no error in his paperwork. The betrayal had come from thousands of miles away, from a mole within the intelligence apparatus in Washington, D.C., a shadow that would not be identified for another decade. The Second Chief Directorate team, led by a colonel named Vitaly Yurchenko, had been tracking Vance since he boarded the train in Khabarovsk. They weren't arresting him yet because they wanted to see who he would meet. They wanted the source. Vance reached the funicular station. The metal gate was rusted, the air smelling of diesel and salt. He adjusted his scarf, the signal that he was ready to receive. He waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The contact, a nervous naval archivist named Sokolov, was nowhere to be seen. At 08:32 a.m., a black Volga sedan pulled up silently to the curb 20 yards behind him. 2 men in plain clothes exited the vehicle. Vance saw them in the reflection of the ticket booth window. He didn't run. Running in a closed city was an admission of guilt that justified immediate lethal force. Instead, he turned, his face a mask of polite confusion, preparing to play the role of the lost trade delegate. "Mr. Jensen," the lead officer said. He didn't speak in Russian, but in flawless, unaccented English. "I believe you have lost your way." Vance smiled, a tight, bureaucratic smile. "I am just looking for the office of the Port Authority. My papers—" "Your papers are excellent forgeries, Mr. Vance," the officer interrupted, dropping the cover name instantly. "But the game is over. Please get in the car. We would prefer not to cause a scene in front of the workers." There was a moment, a fraction of a second, where Robert Vance calculated the odds of escape. He was fit, trained at the farm in unarmed combat, and he had a small, non-metallic blade concealed in his belt. But he looked at the officer's hand, resting heavily in his coat pocket, and he looked at the second car blocking the alleyway. He thought of his wife in Maryland, and the protocol for this exact situation. Rule number 1, do not panic. Rule number 2, assess the value of your capture. Vance nodded slowly. "I suppose the Port Authority is closed today?" he said dryly. He entered the back of the Volga. As the door slammed shut, the fog of Vladivostok seemed to swallow the world outside. He was alive. But as the car accelerated toward the darker outskirts of the city, Robert Vance knew that in the eyes of the Western world, he had just ceased to exist. The facility was not a prison in the conventional sense. It was an unmarked administrative building in the Leninsky district, buried behind high walls and pine trees. There were no bars on the windows from the outside, only heavy steel shutters on the inside. This was a holding site for the KGB's counterintelligence investigations, a place where the Soviet state processed its most complicated problems. Vance was stripped of his possessions, his watch, his belt, his shoes, the concealed blade, and the cyanide capsule disguised as a focal pill in his glasses case. He was given a gray uniform made of coarse cotton and placed in a cell that measured 6 feet by 8 feet. The lights were fluorescent tubes behind wire mesh, and they hummed with a sound that felt like it was drilling into his teeth. They never turned off. For the first 4 days, no one spoke to him. This was standard operating procedure for the KGB. Isolation was cheaper than guards and more effective than physical pressure. They wanted him to stew in his own anxiety, to replay every mistake, to worry about what they knew and what they didn't know. They wanted him to construct his own prison within his mind before they even asked the first question. Vance spent the time exercising, push-ups until his arms shook, sit-ups until his core burned. He paced the cell, 3 steps forward, turn, 3 steps back. He recited the roster of the 1927 New York Yankees. He replayed chess games from memory. He built a mental wall, brick by brick, separating Robert Vance, the man, from Robert Vance, the case officer. On the 5th day, the door opened. Colonel Yurchenko entered. He was a man of average height, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and then left out in the rain. He carried a metal chair and a pack of American cigarettes. He placed the chair in the center of the room, sat down, and lit a cigarette. He didn't offer one to Vance. "It is a long way from Virginia," Yurchenko said. Vance stood at attention, his back against the cold concrete wall. "I am a citizen of Sweden. My name is Lars Jensen. I demand to speak to my consulate." Yurchenko smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Robert, please. We are professionals. We know who you are. We know you work for the Directorate of Operations. We know about your station chief in Tokyo. We know about the drop you were supposed to make." He exhaled a plume of blue smoke. Sokolov talked. He was very talkative before he left us. The implication hung in the air. Sokolov was gone. The source was neutralized. "I am Lars Jensen," Vance repeated, his voice steady. "We are not going to hurt you, Robert," Yurchenko said, standing up. "We are civilized people, but you are in Vladivostok. You are off the map. You have no diplomatic immunity here because you are not a diplomat. You are a spy. And under Article 64 of the RSFSR Criminal Code, the penalty for espionage is severe." He left the cell. The door clanged shut. The interrogation process that followed over the next 3 weeks was a masterclass in psychological erosion. They didn't use violence. They used time. They disrupted his sleep schedule, waking him up at irregular intervals for inspections. They altered the temperature of the cell, freezing cold 1 hour, stiflingly hot the next. They fed him watery cabbage soup and stale bread. They brought him into interrogation rooms and showed him photos of his house in Maryland. Photos of his car. Photos that could only have been taken by someone standing on his front lawn. "Your government has abandoned you," Yurchenko told him during a session in the 3rd week. "They deny you exist. To them, you are a liability. To us, you are an opportunity." Vance held on. He knew the game. He admitted nothing. He stuck to the cover story of Lars Jensen, the trade inspector, even though they both knew it was a lie. It was a ritual, a dance of will. But Vance was weakening. The isolation was beginning to fracture his concentration. He started hearing phantom sounds, a phone ringing, the sound of his wife's voice. Then, abruptly, the routine changed. On the morning of the 25th day, the guards came in, handcuffed him, and marched him down a corridor he hadn't seen before. They didn't take him to the interrogation room. They took him to a larger holding cell in the basement levels, a damp, stone-walled room that smelled of mold and centuries of misery. They shoved him inside and locked the door, Vance stumbled in the darkness, his eyes adjusting. He wasn't alone. Sitting in the corner, illuminated by a single weak bulb, was an old man. He had a long white beard and skin that looked like parchment paper. He was wearing the rags of what might have once been a military uniform, stripped of all insignia. He looked up at Vance with eyes that were startlingly clear and blue. "Welcome to the bottom of the world, American," the old man said in Russian, his voice rasping like dry leaves. Vance hesitated, then replied in Russian, "I'm Swedish." The old man laughed, a dry wheezing sound. "And I am the Tsar of all Russias. Sit down, boy. If they put you in here with me, it means they are done playing with you. Now the real waiting begins." The old man's name, or at least the name he gave, was Nikolai. For the first 2 days in the shared cell, Vance remained guarded. A cellmate was a classic KGB ploy, a plant or a stool pigeon sent to gain the prisoner's trust and extract information that the interrogators couldn't get. Vance assumed Nikolai was an informant, likely a criminal looking for a reduced sentence in exchange for betraying the American. But there was something about Nikolai that didn't fit the profile of a snitch. He was too calm. He possessed an air of authority that transcended his rags. He didn't ask questions about Vance's mission or his background. Instead, he spoke of history, of philosophy, of the changing tides of the Pacific. "They keep me here," Nikolai said one evening, staring at the damp wall, "because they don't know what else to do with me. I am too dangerous to release, but too valuable to eliminate. I am a living archive of their mistakes." "What mistakes?" Vance asked, testing the waters. Nikolai turned his head slowly. "The kind that change maps. The kind that would make your people in Langley very interested." Vance stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a trade inspector." Nikolai chuckled. "Stop it. It is exhausting. We are 2 dead men in a stone box. Let us at least have the dignity of truth. You are CIA. I can smell the distinct odor of American institutional arrogance on you." He paused, then lowered his voice. "I was director at S. Illegals. I ran networks in London in the 1950s. I was the handler for the Portland spy ring before the British rolled it up. You know your history, American?" Vance stared at him. If this was true, Nikolai was a legend, a ghost from the height of the espionage wars. "Why are you here?" Vance asked, dropping the cover for the first time. "Because I backed the wrong horse," Nikolai said. "When the leadership changed, when Andropov came to power, old loyalties became liabilities. I knew where the bodies were buried because I helped bury them. So they buried me." Over the next week, a strange dynamic formed. The guards left them alone. The interrogations of Vance stopped completely. It was as if the KGB was letting them marinate together. Vance realized this might still be a setup, but his instincts told him otherwise. Nikolai's bitterness was too deep, too specific to be manufactured. They played chess using pieces made from molded breadcrumbs. As they played, they talked. Nikolai tested Vance's knowledge of tradecraft, of history. Vance tested Nikolai's knowledge of the Soviet apparatus. "The system is rotting," Nikolai whispered one night. "It looks strong from the outside, missiles, parades, steel. But inside, it is rust and fear. The corruption is eating the structural beams. They don't care about ideology anymore. They care about dachas and imported whiskey." "Why tell me?" Vance asked. "Because I am dying," Nikolai said simply. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that shook his frail frame. "I have maybe 6 months. Maybe less. The dampness in these walls is filling my lungs, and I do not want to take my knowledge to the grave. It is the only weapon I have left against the men who put me here." He looked at Vance intensely. "You are going home, Robert. Eventually. They will trade you. You are a bargaining chip. I am garbage. But if I give you something, if I put something in your head, then a part of me escapes this cell. A part of me strikes back at them." Vance leaned in. "What do you have?" Nikolai smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "Everything. I was the archivist for the Far East Directorate before my arrest. I didn't just file reports, I memorized them. I know the names of the moles you have in your State Department. I know the real yield of the SS-20 missiles, but more importantly, I know about Operation Red Zenith." Vance had never heard the term. "What is Red Zenith?" "It is a plan. Nikolai said, his voice barely audible. A plan to compromise the American banking system's digital infrastructure. It is not about bombs, Robert. It is about chaos. They have been planting sleepers in your financial sector for 10 years. Not to steal secrets, but to destroy data when the signal is given. Vance felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the cell. If true, this was intelligence gold. It was the kind of secret that could shift the balance of the Cold War. "Why give it to me?" Vance asked. "Because," Nikolai said, knocking over his own king on the breadcrumb chessboard, "I want you to be my courier. I want you to carry my revenge across the border." The transfer of information began the next day. It had to be done in absolute secrecy. Although the cell appeared unmonitored, they had to assume the walls had ears. They developed a system. They spoke only during the noise of the shift changes, or when the heavy ventilation fans kicked on, masking their whispers. Nikolai didn't have documents. He had a mind sharpened by decades of intelligence work. He taught Vance to build a mind palace, a mnemonic technique used to store vast amounts of information. "Imagine a house," Nikolai instructed. "A house you know perfectly, your childhood home." "Okay," Vance said, closing his eyes. "Walk through the front door. What is on the left?" "A coat rack." "Good. On the coat rack hang the name Project Zenith. The first hook is the date of inception, 1974. The second hook is the name of the lead operative, Colonel Volkov. Visualize Volkov's face on the coat." For weeks, this was their existence. They built a cathedral of secrets inside Vance's mind. Nikolai fed him names, dates, account numbers, operational codes. He gave him the locations of dead drops in Washington, D.C. that were still active. He gave him the identities of 3 KGB officers working under diplomatic cover at the UN who were actually saboteurs. Vance absorbed it all. His brain became a hard drive, formatted by Nikolai's voice. The stress was immense. If he forgot a digit, a name, the intelligence would be worthless. If the guards caught on, they would both be executed immediately. The physical toll on Nikolai was visible. He was growing weaker by the day. He stopped eating his rations, passing his bread to Vance. "You need the strength," he would say. "You have a long journey." One night, the door opened unexpectedly. 2 guards entered and grabbed Nikolai. "Time for a checkup, old man." One guard sneered. Vance jumped up, but a guard shoved him back against the wall with the butt of a rifle. "Sit down, spy." They dragged Nikolai out. Vance listened to his footsteps fading down the corridor. He sat in the silence, his heart hammering. Had they been discovered? Was Nikolai being taken to be shot? Hours passed. Vance paced. He rehearsed the mind palace, the coat rack, the kitchen table, the hallway mirror. He verified the data points, ensuring they were locked in. Before dawn, the door opened again. They threw Nikolai back in. He landed on the floor in a heap. He was bruised, his lips split, breathing heavily. Vance crawled over to him. "Nikolai?" The old man opened one swollen eye. "They suspect," he wheezed. "They asked what we talk about. I told them I was converting you to Marxism." He tried to laugh, but it turned into a cough. "They didn't believe me, but they don't know." "They don't know what I gave you." He grabbed Vance's wrist with surprising strength. "We are running out of time. The trade. I heard the guards talking. The Americans are negotiating. A swap. You are leaving soon." "I won't leave you," Vance said. "A ridiculous promise in a place like this." "You must," Nikolai hissed. "You are the vessel. If you stay, the truth stays here and rots with me. You must go. And when you get back, you destroy them. You destroy the network." In Washington, D.C., the situation was delicate. The State Department was officially denying that Robert Vance worked for the government, while the CIA director was in a closed-door meeting with the president. The Soviets had signaled through a back channel in East Berlin that they were willing to discuss the Lars Jensen matter. The KGB didn't want a trial. A public trial of an American spy in 1983 would escalate tensions at a time when the Kremlin was trying to negotiate grain imports. They wanted something else. They wanted one of their own back. A physics professor named Valery Markov, who had been arrested in Chicago 2 years prior for stealing guidance system schematics. The negotiations were tense. The CIA was wary. Why would the KGB give up a captured officer so easily? Usually they kept them for years, draining them dry. The speed of the offer suggested two things. Either Vance was useless to them, or they had already broken him and were sending him back as a double agent to feed disinformation. Counterintelligence Chief James Angleton was long gone, but his paranoia remained in the walls of Langley. If he comes back, the analysts argued, we have to treat him as hostile. He's been in Vladivostok for 2 months. We don't know what they've done to him. Despite the doubts, the president authorized the trade. Get our boy back, he said. We'll sort out his head later. Back in the cell, the end came swiftly. On a Tuesday morning, the guards entered with a new set of clothes, civilian clothes. A cheap European suit, a white shirt, and shoes that were slightly too big. Get dressed, the guard commanded Vance. Vance looked at Nikolai. The old man was sitting against the wall, his eyes closed. He looked like he was already halfway to the next world. It is time, Vance said softly. Nikolai opened his eyes. There was no sadness in them, only a fierce, burning resolve. Remember the house, Robert. Don't let the furniture move. I won't. Go. Vance stood up. He dressed quickly. The guards shackled his hands and feet. As they led him to the door, Vance turned back one last time. Nikolai raised a trembling hand in a silent salute. The door slammed shut. Vance never saw him again. They didn't fly him out. The airspace over the Far East was restricted and the weather was grounding flights. Instead, they put him on a specialized prisoner transport train attached to a military convoy heading west, the Trans-Siberian route. It was a journey of over 9,000 kilometers. Vance was placed in a windowless compartment guarded by 2 silent Spetsnaz commandos. The rhythmic clacking of the wheels on the tracks became the metronome of his anxiety. Clack, clack. 1974. Clack, clack. Project Zenith. Clack, clack. Account number 8842. He spent the days reviewing the Mind Palace. He was terrified that the trauma of the journey, the lack of food, or the sheer exhaustion would cause the memories to degrade. He visualized walking through the rooms of his childhood home, dusting off the objects, ensuring the secrets were still there. The journey took 7 days. 7 days of darkness, shaking metal, and the smell of unwashed bodies. He didn't know where he was going. Berlin? Vienna? On the 4th day, the train stopped in the middle of nowhere. Siberia. The silence was absolute. The door opened and Colonel Yurchenko stepped in. He looked fresh, rested. Enjoying the scenery, Robert? It's a bit repetitive, Vance croaked. Yurchenko sat opposite him. You spent a lot of time with the old man, Nikolai. Vance's heart skipped a beat. He talked a lot, mostly about the war. Yurchenko studied him. Nikolai was a traitor, a bitter, senile traitor. We put him in there to see if he would try to recruit you, to see if he still had any fight left. He didn't seem to have much of anything left. Vance lied. Good, Yurchenko said. Because if we thought you were carrying anything of his, you would never leave this train, you understand? I have nothing, Vance said. I just want to go home. Yurchenko stared at him for a long, uncomfortable minute. Then he nodded. We will be in East Germany in 3 days. Do not make me regret this, Robert. It wasn't the Glienicke Bridge. That was for the movies. The exchange took place at a remote border crossing near Herleshausen, on the border between East and West Germany. It was dawn. The fog was just as thick here as it had been in Vladivostok. 2 convoys of vehicles arrived on opposite sides of the barrier. On the east side, 3 black sedans. On the west, 2 American diplomatic cars and a van. Vance was pulled out of the car. The cold air hit his face like a slap. His legs were weak from the weeks of confinement. He stood shivering in his cheap suit. Across the tarmac, he saw a man being led out of the American van. Valery Markov. The physicist looked healthy, well-fed. He was wearing a warm coat. The contrast was stark. An official in a trench coat walked to the center line. Words were exchanged. Papers were signed. Walk, Yurchenko whispered in Vance's ear. And don't look back. Vance began to walk. His legs felt heavy. Every step was a battle against the instinct that said a bullet was about to tear through his back. He focused on the American flag on the bumper of the car ahead. Just keep walking. The coat rack, The kitchen table, the mirror. He passed Markov in the middle of the road. They didn't look at each other. They were just currency, exchanged by banks that dealt in human lives. Vance reached the American side. A hand grabbed his arm. Strong, firm. "Welcome home, Bob," a voice said. It was his station chief from Tokyo who had flown in for the ID. Vance collapsed into the back seat of the sedan. As the car sped away toward the safety of West Germany, he didn't cry. He didn't sleep. He closed his eyes and walked into his mind palace. He had to make sure the furniture was still standing. Langley, Virginia. The debriefing room was sterile, white and soundproof. Vance sat hooked up to a polygraph machine. The needles scratched across the paper. Across the table sat a team of counterintelligence officers. They looked at him with suspicion, not sympathy. "Let's go over the timeline again, Robert," the lead interrogator said. "You were in a cell with a former GRU archivist for 3 weeks, and the guards just let you talk?" "Yes," Vance said. "And he just gave you the keys to the kingdom? For nothing?" "He wanted revenge," Vance said. "He knew he was dying." "It sounds like a plant, Bob," the interrogator said. "It sounds like the KGB fed you chicken feed mixed with poison. They want us to chase these leads so we burn our own assets." "Check the data," Vance insisted. "I gave you the account numbers. I gave you the names." "We're checking," the interrogator said. "But until we verify, you are to remain in isolation. You're under medical quarantine. But let's be honest, it's security quarantine." Vance was frustrated. He had carried the fire of Prometheus across the ocean, and they were afraid it would burn them. He understood their caution, but the clock was ticking. If Nikolai's intel about Red Zenith was true, the sleepers were already in place. It took 2 weeks for the NSA to crack the first code. Using the account numbers Vance provided from his memory, they accessed a series of shell company records in the Cayman Islands. The trail led to a bank in Zurich and then to a server in New Jersey. The data matched. The analysts found the logic bomb, a piece of dormant code inserted into the mainframe of a major clearinghouse for U.S. Treasury bonds. If activated, it would have wiped out trillions of dollars of transaction records, causing an economic collapse that would have made the Great Depression look like a picnic. The atmosphere in Langley changed overnight. The skepticism vanished, replaced by urgent, panicked activity. He was right, the director admitted in a briefing. The old man was right, it's all real. Vance was brought back in. This time, there was coffee and donuts. The interrogators were taking notes, respectful, hungry for more. "What else, Bob? What else is in the house?" Vance closed his eyes. "Go to the living room," he said. "Look under the rug. Operation Glass Wall, the moles in the State Department." He gave them 3 names. The FBI put them under surveillance. Within a month, all 3 were arrested passing documents to handlers in Rock Creek Park. The intelligence Vance brought back was devastating to the KGB. It rolled up networks that had taken decades to build. It exposed technical vulnerabilities in Soviet missile shields. It identified the compromised acoustic sensors in the North Atlantic. From a cell in Vladivostok, a dying old man had just blinded the Soviet Pacific Fleet. Chapter 10. The Cost of Secrets. Robert Vance was a hero, but a secret one. He received the Intelligence Star in a closed ceremony. He was given a promotion and a desk job. He could never go back into the field. His face was known to the center now. He tried to return to normal life. He mowed his lawn in Maryland. He went to his daughter's soccer games. But he was different. He was quieter. He flinched at sudden noises. He couldn't sleep without a light on. He often thought of Nikolai. He wondered when the old man had died. He wondered if the KGB ever figured out what he had done. One evening, 6 months after his return, Vance was sitting on his porch. A car pulled up. It wasn't the FBI or the CIA. It was a courier. Package for Mr. Vance. Vance signed for it. It was a small plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single item, a white queen from a chess set. It was crudely carved, not from wood, but from dried bread. Vance held the piece in his hand. It was one of the pieces they had played with in the cell. There was no note. There didn't need to be. It was a message. Whether it was from a survivor, a sympathizer, or a ghost, Vance didn't know. But he knew what it meant. Checkmate. Chapter 11. The Long Shadow. The geopolitical fallout of Vance's return lasted for years. The Red Zenith discovery forced the Soviets to completely overhaul their cyber warfare program, setting them back a decade. The exposure of the moles in Washington caused a purge in the Kremlin, as paranoid leaders turned on each other, blaming one another for the leak. Vance's information contributed to the strategy that would eventually bankrupt the Soviet Union. By forcing them to spend billions patching the security holes Nikolai had revealed, the U.S. accelerated the economic collapse of the USSR. But for Vance, the victory was personal, not political. It was about keeping a promise to a dying man in a dungeon. He retired in 1994, 3 years after the Soviet flag came down over the Kremlin for the last time. He moved to a cabin in Montana, far away from the fog and the sea. In 2005, a declassified report from the Russian archives surfaced. It detailed the final days of prisoner 402, the man Vance knew as Nikolai. His real name was indeed Nikolai, a former colonel who had been purged in 1982. The report stated that he died of pneumonia 2 weeks after Vance was transferred. But there was a footnote in the file, written by a prison doctor. The prisoner died peacefully, unusual for this facility. He was smiling. When asked why, he whispered only one word: delivered. Robert Vance read the report sitting by his fireplace. He looked at the breadcrumb chess piece, now preserved in a small glass case on his mantel. He raised a glass of whiskey to the fire. "To the bottom of the world, Nikolai," he said softly. The secrets they shared had changed history. But the bond they formed in the dark was the only secret Robert Vance kept for himself.